Okay, we're going to look at finding limits numerically. So first, let's suppose we have the function f of x equals x squared minus 4 over x minus 2, and suppose we try to find f of 2. Well, if you plug 2 into this function, we don't get a real number. Notice it is undefined because there's going to be a 0 in the denominator. You end up with 0 over 0. So in this particular case, f of 2, we say, is undefined. Or another way of saying that is it does not exist, DNE. So suppose we wish to investigate what is happening to y as x gets close to 2. So let's take a look at a table of values for x and y for values really close to x equals 2. So I've created a table here, and notice that 2 is in the middle for the x value, and when x is 2, we said how the function does not exist, it's undefined. So I've approached 2 from both the left and the right. I've gotten closer to it from each side. So if we're interested in figuring out what is happening to y as x gets closer and closer to 2, we can write this using limit notation. So we say the limit, LIM is our abbreviation for a limit, the limit of the function f of x as x approaches 2. So when we write it like that, what's implied is that we are approaching 2 from each direction, from the left and from the right. So that means from values slightly smaller than it and values slightly greater than it. So if we look at what's going on here, it's pretty obvious that as we approach 2 from each direction and get closer and closer to it, the limiting value is 4. Okay, so think of a limit as a y value. It's a height. So the limit as x approaches 2 is 4. Now, we said that f of 2 does not exist. However, notice that the limit does exist at that point. And by the way, you are typically going to be allowed to use a calculator anytime you need to plug in and get values to put into a table like we did here. And finally here, if we were to sketch our function f of x using our calculator, what you would notice is that a line appears, and if you were to graph it in z decimal, you would see a little gap, or sometimes we call that a hole, at 2, 4. So we mentioned how the limit exists, all right, as x approaches 2 from each side. So as we get closer and closer, we know that the y value is 4, but notice how it's not defined. Okay, so we mentioned that f of 2 does not exist. So more on holes later on, but in this situation, what's happening here at x equals 2 is that we have a hole. It's not defined, so that's what's going on.